Republican Elise Stefanik, a new ambassador of the US to UN, turns from pro-NATO Ukrainian in the early days of the war into whatever Trump says today. Ukrainian bonds shoot up as investors expect Trump to end the war. Ex-commanding General of United States Army Europe, General Frederick Benjamin Hodges, is in our studio. Tonight's interview at UATV English. Don't you dare to miss it. Good afternoon. These topics in more detail. My name is Henry Keane, and we are at UATV English bringing you the hard truth in easy terms for the whole free world, directly from Ukraine. CNN writes about Republican Elise Stefanik, a President-elect Donald Trump's pick for U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, who is now refusing to stand by her previous push for Ukraine's NATO membership, a stance she once framed as critical to regional stability. Her office also declined to say whether she still believes Russia committed genocide in Ukraine, as she said it in 2022. And in 2022, Stefanik urged NATO to admit the nation, especially as Russia's invasion escalated. At that time, she argued for extensive military aid support, highlighting the Trump administration's previous providing of Javelin missiles.
I've seen how important Ukraine is for the region. They need to be admitted into NATO, and we need to do everything we can by providing them munition and javelins. And remember, the javelins were supplied under the Trump's administration. Elise Stefanik, American Congresswoman, from a 2022 statement.
Her comments at the time reflected the strong pro-Ukrainian stance that aligned with broad bipartisan support for Kiev in the early days of the conflict. Now, however, when asked if she still supports NATO membership for Ukraine, Stefanik's spokesperson declined to specifically address her current position. Instead, her office signaled that she is aligning with Trump's approach.
Chairwoman Stefanik fully supports President Trump's peace through strength policy agenda and will follow his lead as Commander-in-Chief on best practices to end the war in Ukraine. Elise Stefanik's communications director in comments for CNN.
Stefanik's non-answer on Ukraine's possible NATO membership comes as a public opinion on providing aid has shifted away from the earlier support for Ukraine, with Trump and other Republicans voicing increasing skepticism about the role of American military and financial aid in the prolonged war for values these very Republicans preach aloud. Stefanik's actions in the House also shift the public opinion. She initially championed pro-Ukrainian legislation and supported numerous sanctions against Russia, along with multiple rounds of military aid for Ukraine. But in April, she votes against a $60 billion Ukraine aid package, citing concerns of the spending and saying it was better to prioritize the crisis at the southern American border. That stands a sharp contrast with comments she made in April 2022 when she voiced that she was amongst nearly 400 members of the U.S. House of Representatives sanctioned by Russia, calling it a badge of honor. She clearly described Russia's actions as genocide against the Ukrainian people and labeled Russian President Vladimir Putin as thug and war criminal. Her office declined to comment further when asked if she stood by her past comments that Russia was committing genocide in Ukraine. Well, I understand that. No, I really do. Stefanik is not alone in her shape-shifting. She is just an example. If Elise Stefanik or any other political shapeshifter would have been in Bucha, for example, and would see that enormous pit in the ground, a mass grave of Ukrainians with their hands tied behind their backs, slaughtered by Russians, even if amongst all these dead faces Elise Stefanik would somehow recognize a familiar face, God forbid, a relative, a friend, a family member, then she would anyway had to go for no-answer regime to align with standards sent from the presidential above, even if they are asked directly in their face if this is a genocide. Well, I understand. Politics is politics. Nothing personal, just business. We all heard that. Nothing good happens usually. After that being said, as the question why it is not prioritized otherwise and is not personal first, and then business is a big question to all of us as a society. For now, personal and business rarely unite, and suit yourself if that is the case now. As Financial Times notices that Ukraine's sovereign bonds have soared in price as investors bet that Trump's administration will end the war fast. The dollar-denominated bond is up 12% in the past month in expectations that the re-election of Donald Trump will lead to ceasefire and boost Ukraine's capacity to repay creditors. The jump in the price of Ukrainian bonds, which one investor in the country called the unlikeliest Trump trade ever, comes as bets relating to the new administration have swept global financial markets in the recent weeks. Trump has said he will end the war in Ukraine within a day of returning to the White House, though he has not offered any specifics on how exactly he would do that. But he sold the idea to the world, that much is clear. The main part of the trade has really been based on the war ending, or at least the possibility of Trump pushing through the start of negotiations, says Thais Lowe, portfolio manager at 91, which owns some Ukrainian bonds. The rally has come just over 2 months after Kyiv completed a restructuring of more than $20 billion of debt in one of the fastest and biggest sovereign debt workouts in modern history. Bond investors are betting that the country will be prepared to permanently give up territory it has lost in the war and that its economy will recover quickly in the years ahead. But what about the blood? I assume hundreds of thousands were murdered by Russia. What about them? I guess bond investors would ask me, oh, come on, Henry. What you want, more dead, more casualties, more land lost? I might, of course, be asking these investors a question in return. What is the value of countries' sovereignty bonds without sovereignty of the country? But I won't say anything. I delegate that hard decision to the Ukrainian nation that suffered immensely for its freedom and sovereignty. Maybe some of it indeed could be traded for sovereignty bonds, if that at least bonds just peace. But luckily, it is not for me to decide. The interviewer at UATV English, former Commander-in-Chief of American Army Europe, General Hodges, is with us tonight. A privilege, sir. Thank you so very much for joining.
Well, thank you very much for the privilege of participating.
My first question, of course, Kursk incursion. But, let me put it straightforward. If you would be in charge of the operation right now, in a state it is now, what would you do?
Well, I think that the decision by the General Staff to launch this counteroffensive in the Kursk direction was a very good idea. And it still is delivering positive effects for Ukraine. It has created a dilemma for the Kremlin. It is forcing them to commit resources that they don't have elsewhere. And it's also, we're going to get to see whether or not the North Korean troops are what kind of effect they have. But the main thing it did is that I believe it has changed the narrative that somehow Russian victory is inevitable, that Russia can't be defeated. This counteroffensive, I think, changes that narrative.
Yeah, well, I've heard people saying Russia is a juggernaut of sorts, which is not a paper tiger, maybe, or maybe not. But how are we doing in Kursk? Any insights, maybe?
Well, of course, I can't tell for sure without access to Ukrainian intelligence, and so I would not expect to have that kind of insight. But it seems to me that after almost 4 months now, Russia still has not been able to eliminate the Ukrainian bridgehead. They have not been able to eradicate this threat inside Russia, and it does create a real problem for the Kremlin. Do they leave it there? Do they commit resources to it? Do they keep doing what they're hoping to do in the East? I think this is still an appropriate operation for the Ukrainian General Staff.
Thank you so very much for that answer. Well, let me ask you a question about American politics, which is Fox TV host Pete Hegseth might be hosting Pentagon shows for now. Mr. Hegseth as a defense secretary of the United States of America. How likely this figure to be confirmed by the Senate, you think, General?
Well, that's an important question, and it's a question that I have also. As you know from your question, our system the Constitution requires Senate consent on people who the president wants to nominate.
Right.
And so this will be an early test for the new Senate Majority Leader, Senator Thune, a Republican, on whether or not they will require confirmation, or will they sort of roll over and allow the administration to bypass the confirmation process to get their people in place. This is an important test. I hope that the Senate will do their duty, their constitutional duty. Of course, every president has the prerogative to nominate who they want for their team, and there's every election. There's always some controversial nominee that is going to meet resistance. So that's not new. What seems new this time is the number of nominees, like Mr. Hegseth, who don't on the surface appear to have the normal traditional qualifications. And so this is going to be important for the Senate to do its duty.
All right. Well, you live in Germany, so with all this Scholz, die Totenhosen and political turmoil, how likely do you think then in Germany that Friedrich Merz will become a new chancellor then?
Well, I think the polling indicates that the CDU and the CSU will win the election, and so that Mr. Merz will become the Bundeskanzler after that, when a new coalition is formed. So at this point, just based on polling and German media, I would say that's the most likely scenario.
It is, and I think this is a good scenario for Ukraine. What do you say, General?
Well, certainly Mr. Merz has been very clear in recent months in his support for Ukraine, and in speaking to the Kremlin, saying that if they did not stop what they were doing, that he would authorize the use of Taurus, for example, by Ukraine. So these are very positive indicators. And I also think that Mr. Merz is the kind of leader that could, number one, help lead Germany to a much stronger, more forward-leaning position with regards to security and stability in Europe. I don't think he's intimidated or easily swayed by Russia. And he might even be the guy that could convey to President Trump that Europe is prepared to do what it needs to do, but to ask the Americans, don't turn your back on Europe. We still need American nuclear deterrence. We still need American support and leadership. But Mr. Merz is the kind of guy, I think, that could bring along a lot more European support, certainly German support.
Right, well, just some decisiveness could do. I think we can use some decisiveness, that's for sure, in politics. Well, if I will make a statement now, please say if you agree with it or not. Do you think that South and North Korea's war is imminent?
I don't think it's imminent. I think that North Korea is testing South Korea. And of course, this is the way it is. When you don't respond, when deterrence fails, it almost always leads to conflict. And so I think the United States, with our allies in the Indo-Pacific region, have got to make it clear that we will, in fact, defend our South Korean allies. But we got to figure out a way to do this. And I'm surprised that we haven't been more direct with the North Korean side. That we have not taken the steps necessary to stop them from what they're doing. Now, of course, North Korea is already sanctioned. It's not like there's more sanctions that would affect their behavior. But North Korea's only friend in the world is Vladimir Putin. And so, in my view, if we help Ukraine defeat Russia, it further isolates Kim Jong-un, and I think would weaken his ability. Not only would he no longer be receiving technology from the Russians, he would also be further isolated. And I think that's how we have to think strategically.
Absolutely. The only North Korean friend in the world, Vladimir Putin, is obviously taking for granted all Trump's peace efforts, let's call it that way, by escalating in Ukraine. Every night we in Ukraine hear and see that. All right. So such an attitude is obviously turning Trump from a possible ally, so to say, of the Kremlin to an almost certain adversary. And Putin openly neglects Trump's direct warnings about significant American force, that's what Trump said, in Europe. The Russian dictator seems not to care much, if at all, as a commanding general of the American Army Europe. So militarily, that significant force Trump is talking about, how significant is it anyway today?
Well, you've got real American capability alongside the capabilities of our allies from all over Europe and Canada. So there is enough land force to defeat any Russian attack. What we need more of is air and missile defense. I mean, if Russia were to launch air and missile strikes against, say, Lithuania or Poland, the way they do against Ukraine, I'm not sure that we have enough capability to adequately protect all of the critical infrastructure or the population. Now, the other part of this, Russia's already at war with us. I mean, they think in terms of being at war.
Right.
It may not be in the traditional kinetic sense, but they use every other capability from disinformation to criminal activity to attacking cyber attacks or sabotage, interfering with elections, et cetera. I think the sooner that we start thinking in the same terms, the sooner we will be able to take the steps necessary, to have the policies necessary to inflict pain on the Russians so that they stop what they're doing. But we're not that yet.
Very nicely put, inflicting pain. But so, do you think that Putin is just bluffing when saying he can go to war with NATO and win?
Well, I think that this is part of what they do. They talk about nuclear weapons all the time because they see it affects how we act. It causes us to self-deter. And I think that the Kremlin sees if there's a likelihood of some sort of negotiated outcome with Ukraine, they obviously are trying to create the facts on the ground and create a context that gives them the best possible advantage. And to cause Western leaders to think, oh my God, we could end up in a conflict with Russia. We don't want that. Bad luck for Ukraine. I mean, I think this is all part of the process.
Last question for tonight. Ukrainian media, well, a noticeable part of it, let's put it that way, is exemplary. A wrongdoing when criticizing indiscriminately someone they should be doing all possible to turn into an ally. And this is especially stupid, if you ask me, if this someone is the president of the United States. Not a, but the president by now already. So former Commander-in-Chief of American Army Europe, General Hodges, what do you think? What could be your advice to my colleagues, the Ukrainian media journalists?
Well, first of all, remember that the job of media is not to create allies or create policy. The job of media is to shine a bright light and report the facts, to offer analysis so that populations and governments can make their own decisions. So it's not the job of the media to turn Mr. Trump into an ally of Ukraine. It's report the facts. That's an essential part of any democracy, is a media that reports the facts. Now, that also means that criticisms, which are part of the process, need to be based on facts. And you're right, the election is over. All of us, regardless of how we voted, the election is over. And so we need to accept, and I have accepted the outcome of the election, but I also will continue as a free citizen of the United States, continue to challenge policies and behavior that I think are inappropriate or wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. I just feel the absolute need for some of my colleagues to watch this very interview and to understand that some facts can be placed this way or the other first, or the otherwise, but it's the fact. Donald Trump is going to be a president. It doesn't mean you don't have to criticize them, but the way you criticize them could be either favorable for Ukraine or it could be bad for Ukraine. That's what I meant. So, thank you so very much anyway for your time and for your absolute expertise in the questions that we just discussed. Thank you so very much. I hope to talk to you soon.
I'd like that. Thanks again for the privilege.
Thank you. Goodbye. Former Commander-Chief of American Army Europe, General Hodges, answered our questions at UATV English. Well, that's all, folks. My name is Henry Keane, and I and my team at UATV English are thanking you for your time. Please do not shy out to like, share, and comment. We see it every time you do it and appreciate it as it helps the voice of Ukraine to be heard globally. Please stay safe and tuned for more at UATV English next week. Goodbye.